All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto the podcast today Dr. Joshua Stevens. He is the CEO of Stevens Insight Group, LLC, and is going to be a featured speaker at our Modern Data Leaders Summit coming up in Chicago. April 30th is the date that you'll be able to catch Josh. And we're going to talk a little bit about modern data management, as you might expect, given the topic of that Modern Data Leaders Summit, but mostly about building a data modernization strategy, I think is kind of where I'd like to focus today. But before we jump into all of that good stuff, Josh, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Thanks for the invite. I'm honored to be here. I've been enjoying the previous posts of podcasts, and that's been a lot of fun to kind of hear a little bit from your guests and what they do. I wasn't a subscriber before, but I subscribed just a few weeks ago, and yeah, it's been great.
Well,
So
that's fantastic news. Yeah, we're still new, we're just cracking into our second year, and
sure.
it's not like we were front runners in the podcast world, certainly, with us just starting this last year, but we are growing and very happy to hear that you've enjoyed some of the previous podcasts that we've done. And I'm excited to talk with you today. I think we're going to have a great conversation. But
Yeah.
before we jump into, some of the more, interesting questions around modernizing data management, can you share a little bit about yourself, like your background, how you ended up where you are today?
Sure. It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it brief. I'm basically a software developer by trade. Found out early on that I really like data, so I've been working in some form of data management for about 15 to 20 years. Moved from EDI, electronic data transfer, over into cost accounting, and then into analytics. Big proponent of data governance. I've been doing data governance for about a decade. And then about 2 years ago, I was working for a major health system here in the state of Michigan. And I decided after COVID and all the things that came with that, I decided life is short. Let's try to start a company. And it's been a dream of mine to do. And so in 2021, I started my own company doing basically agile transformation as well as digital transformation, specifically in the data management space. So I really help companies with process, with the technology. And one of the things I like the most is just working with the people. And so launched that in 2021, and it's kind of slowly been growing, and it's been a lot of fun. Prior to starting the business, I was working as a director for enterprise information management, and I led about a half dozen, a little bit more than that, teams in the data and analytics space, doing ETL and data science and managing platforms. And so it's something I'm passionate about, something that I have a lot of experience in, and I'm just looking forward to sharing more.
Well, that's fantastic. And obviously, there's a major reason why you're going to be joining us in Chicago. You have this incredible resume and all this experience. So let's just jump right in here. Simple question to start off, maybe not, but how do you define modern data management, Josh?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I think about modern data management, it's really hard to not define it using the terms, right? Like modern data management, the word modern there is probably the most challenging part, because I feel like once you implement a new technology as an organization grows and moves into the space a bit more, that technology all of a sudden becomes a little less modern, right? There's something new in the marketplace that can do the same thing and oftentimes do it better. And so that I think is a really big challenge. When I was working as a director for enterprise information management, I actually realized that I didn't have a definition for the word information. And that kind of blew my mind, because it's just a term we use all the time, but what
Mhm.
is the definition? And I happened upon it in a book called Data Science for Business. It's a book by Foster and Provost, and they define information as a quantity that reduces uncertainty, which to me was like, oh, that's kind of a unique definition. When I think about modern data management, in my mind, I put it in that context. And so the way I've defined it, and of course there's all kinds of definitions you can look up online, but the way that I define it is really it's an ongoing practice that leverages advancements in technology, the best practices, the skill sets, in order to reduce uncertainty. And that uncertainty could be uncertainty around new opportunities we should take advantage of. It could be pitfalls we need to avoid. It can be internal, it can be external, it can be new products. And so that's the way that I define it. But I think as soon as you put a definition on it, something changes and you kind of have to expand that definition. So even in saying that, I'm a little bit cautious.
No, I totally understand. It feels like, we just, in previous podcasts, I've said, a lot of times we're slapping the word modern in front of something that's been around for 15,
Right.
20 years as well. So that definitely, it jives with everything I've heard. And I actually quite like the definition of information. That's the first I've heard of that. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
I do think it helps, narrow it down a little bit because that is interesting. Something that's so normal in everyday language
Right.
to try and define seems like a difficult task.
Yep.
So I know, the actual speaking session that you're going to give at our Modern Data Leader Summit is on the agile approach to building a data modernization strategy. So what are the critical components of modern data management strategy?
Yeah, there's a long list. I think anybody that thinks it's just technology is probably not helping themselves. When I think about the strategy and what an organization needs to do, I think of it kind of in different pieces. And the first three that I'd mentioned that I think are probably most critical are understanding the current state problems, right? You got to know what you're actually doing with the modern technology and why you're doing it. I've heard many leaders say, "Oh, we need to go to the cloud. We need to get to the cloud." And when I ask why, it's like, "Well, I heard it at a conference, or it's something other people are doing." And it's like, no, it's got to be more than that. You've got to have a why behind like why you're trying to move to the cloud and what you're trying to achieve. And so the first place I always look is like, let's uncover some rocks. Let's figure out what are the things that are broken in the organization that need to be fixed. And then let's try to apply modern technology, modern processes. And sometimes it has more to do with skill set than even the technology. And so really trying to find what's the right fit for the organization, trying to understand the cloud strategy behind it, and then kind of working our way inward. But starting with the current state problems is probably the most important part. Otherwise, you're just building things that you don't really know what it's going to do. It might provide opportunity, it might not. The second piece I would say is strategic alignment, and this goes really hand in hand with current state problems. If you're trying to solve a problem that other people aren't feeling, you're going to have a hard time getting them to adopt it and moving forward with that particular platform. And so making sure that you're not just onboarding a data platform for the sake of, say, your department or your area of the organization, but doing it for the sake of the whole organization and thinking about it holistically is a big piece. So making sure that there's some form of organizational strategy that you're aligning to needs to be a big aspect of what you're doing. And then the third piece I'd say is governance. There's a bunch more. There's communications, there's staffing, there's the actual technology itself. There's portfolios and processes and how you're going to fund it and legal implications. But I'd say governance is the third thing to really make sure that you have a focus around. And when I say governance, there's a bit of it's a bit of a misnomer from a term perspective. Some people, when they hear governance or data governance, they think of control. And some people, when they hear data governance, they think of context. And I'm referring more to the context side of things. The control piece has to be there as well. But when you're trying to modernize the data infrastructure and the things that you're doing as an organization, one of the biggest barriers to doing that well is not having a good view of what your current data landscape is. And so having a data governance framework, the tools and the processes behind it to identify what's the most important piece to move first, what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. That's a big part of it. And with that is the control, right? Making sure that your information security teams are okay with what you're doing, and making sure everything is done properly and in order is also important. So yeah, there's a lot of pieces to it, and I think not thinking holistically about it is actually a big challenge that people face.
Yeah, I hear so often, even with the emergence of generative AI, that certain leaders within an organization are like, we just need to do, I don't care what it is, we need to have this happen, right? So I think obviously putting the cart before the horse a little bit is not what you want to do, right? You want to, this is part of the
Right.
reason that you develop a strategy is you want to,
Yep.
start from the beginning and work your way through the process. And you outlined a couple of pitfalls there when you were describing these important pillars, but I'm curious if you're seeing maybe some other mistakes that organizations are making as they try to modernize their data management strategy.
Yeah, that's actually hard to kind of narrow down because there's a lot of different mistakes people make. Um, I, for me, I think one of the biggest things is, and I alluded to this earlier, is it's just assuming that it's all about technology. I've been a part of organizations that have implemented really expensive, new platforms and basically got no value from them because they didn't really think about the cultural implications of that new technology, the architectural implications, how people are going to be using it, even making sure they have the right skills in place to leverage the new technology was a big challenge. And so if as a leader, you're just focusing in on, hey, I need that technology. I saw it work great at a prior organization, or I went to a conference and that thing is going to change our world. Yeah, there's a good chance that it could, but it's more than just the technology. And so that's probably my biggest caution. I think, leaders have to really focus in on the people aspects and the process aspects as well. I mentioned several of the capabilities or the components of a modern data strategy. It's the technology piece is almost the easiest piece. It can be overwhelming, and I don't know if you follow Matt Turk at all, mattturk.com. He's got a great infographic on like all the technology that's out there. And it's overwhelming. If you look at it, there's so many things in the marketplace right now. But again, you can't just focus on the tech. You got to focus on what are the problems you're solving and who's going to be involved in the overall process. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm not familiar with Matt. I'm gonna have to check that out because I can only imagine what it looks like. If it's in
it's
visual terms, it's probably overwhelming. You can get stuck in the
it's
weeds trying to even
unbelievable.
just filter through that, I'm assuming.
Right.
Um, so I do want to kind of turn into some of the technology, although we don't want to focus on that, but with the need to handle more diverse kinds of data, unstructured data, for image and the rest. How do you see organizations planning for that part of it? I'm assuming that's not most, but some of this modernization trend
Yeah.
is regarding that kind of data, right?
Yeah, it's definitely something that's growing, and it's been growing for quite a while. I think when you think about data, unstructured data, I think is really what we're talking about here. Images and documents that maybe are not quite as easy to look through from a computer standpoint. When I think of healthcare, and a lot of my background is in healthcare, almost all of my experience is within healthcare, with the exception of the last couple of years. But of course, there have been huge strides in MRI imaging and things like that, being able to classify and even use AI to detect anomalies and things like that in the MRI, the images there. But I think pretty much all of the cloud offerings that are out there right now are thinking about these and have the capabilities embedded within them. And so whether or not leaders are considering that as a use case in the future, they certainly should be using it as a use case. But whether they are or not, they're probably onboarding technologies that can leverage unstructured data almost as easily as the structured data. So it's becoming a little bit less, I'd say less specific, I guess I'd say, in the technology space. But it's definitely something that organizations are looking at. When I think about like 20 to 30 years ago, it was all mainframes, right? Everything was big systems. It was hard to get data out. You didn't really have to integrate with a whole bunch of different tools because there weren't that many on the market. And the pendulum swung from that to people having Excel spreadsheets and basically data becoming ubiquitous across the organization, no matter what your role. And now it's almost an expectation, regardless of where you're at in the organization, that you know how to work with and deal with data. And so whether it's images, whether it's unstructured data or structured data, leaders in this space have to be thinking about it. And so now it's just kind of a lifeblood of modern companies. Like it has to be a part of what you're doing. And like I said, I think it depends a little bit on the industry. It depends a little bit on the use case. But you're missing value if you're not considering it. So,
And I would imagine that the healthcare space is one of those that just really screams like this is, a huge
yeah,
need for handling this unstructured data, right? MRI
for sure.
imaging and the rest of that. So that's where I'm actually quite excited to see the advancements in that space, very specifically because, all of us have health concerns, whether that's your own personal or your family members, friends, whatever the case may be. If we can speed up that process, make those images, much easier to dissect and have those run faster. That's all what we want, right? We
Right.
just want to speed up the process. So that's really good. I have to ask about generative AI. I can't really do a podcast without it. So I'm going to do it now. Do you see organizations being driven by generative AI to modernize their infrastructure and then build a new strategy when it comes to this modernization?
So from my perspective, I think generative AI is obviously something a lot of people are interested in. Like you can't read it, read the news. You can't look at social media without seeing something either related to or actually having been generated by AI in any given day. And so like my social media feeds are just lit up with things that
Yep.
are clearly AI generated. And so I think organizations definitely are driven by those capabilities. But I also think from a leader's perspective, I've been a leader in healthcare in a large healthcare organization, and I know that it can be overwhelming. Certainly, leaders are obligated to drive towards that, depending on where they're at in their organization and their industry and what they're trying to achieve from a strategic standpoint. But I think a lot of leaders are. I'm not sure if it's that they feel inadequate. Maybe they don't have the time to deal with it, or maybe there's bigger problems that they're facing. And so it's really easy to focus in on, hey, let's move forward with generative AI. But leaders are faced with like the basics when it comes to data management. They have dozens of data stores throughout their organization that they're trying to pull into one place. And that alone is not something that's done in days and weeks. That's something that takes a long time to do. The other thing I think that they're challenged with is, you know, AI is only as good as the data that you input it, the data that you train it with. And so if those organizations don't have great data quality and data governance capabilities, then the AI that's generated, although it might look great, is going to be fraught with the same kind of challenges as the quality of the data that's input to it. And so not only are leaders having to think through how they would leverage generative AI, but they have to figure out how do they get the data to train those models in a way that actually makes that AI beneficial and valuable to the consumers, whether those are internal or external. So it's
Yeah,
definitely a big space.
it never ceases to amaze me how so much of what's new really reverts back to like the very basics, like
Right,
you
right.
can only do so much with what you have.
Yep,
But
yep,
that data quality piece is always the biggest component, it seems.
right.
Okay, final question for you. Do organizations, in your estimation, build their data governance strategy in conjunction with their data strategies? I'm assuming that's got to be a reason, like it would make the most
Yeah.
sense to do it that way, but are you seeing that actually happening?
So I would say if they aren't, they should be. I don't think you can do data modernization without some form of data governance working with it. And so if you're trying to do it without data governance, I'd say put a pause on the modernization piece and start working on the data governance side. And I think it's pretty fairly common that data governance is a part of data modernization. I've worked with some of the bigger consulting firms, and data governance is always like front and center to a modernization strategy. It's something that really has to be done, and usually that's the mechanism to uncover the problems with current state. It's the mechanism to make sure that what we're doing from a data perspective aligns with strategy, and so it really is something that goes hand in hand with data strategy and trying to modernize. But yeah, I think companies that aren't doing it, like they're missing out, and it's going to slow them down and probably produce something that isn't as valuable as it could be.
Yeah, I'm curious. We've talked a lot at TDWI webinars podcast in the past about structure, like as far as data governance is concerned. Are you seeing, most of these organizations as they try to modernize have to change up their actual structure to like more of a hub and spoke model or something along those lines when it comes to this data governance piece?
That's a really hard question because I think it depends on the organization, and I think if you're just going to take an architecture, whether that's a data governance framework, whether that's your data modernization, architecture you want to move with. If you're just taking something off the shelf and trying to apply it to your organization, it's probably not going to work. There's probably going to be things that you have to do around roles and role clarity. There's probably things that you have to do around the culture within the organization. You're going to need perhaps new skill sets. And so I don't think I'd go so far as to say like organizations are moving to one model or another. I think it really depends on the organization. It depends on the organization size. It depends on the organization strategy and what they're trying to achieve. So that's a hard question to answer. I would say for larger organizations, the more they can spread out the work, the better. But that's not always the case. You have to have the discipline and the organization behind that work as well, to make sure that you're not just making a lot of mediocre content.
Right. And yeah, don't just change just for the sake of
Right.
changing because it sounds cool. That kind of seems
Right.
like the
Right.
theme to our conversation, right? Like let's pick
Right.
out a reason why we're making these decisions and making these
Exactly.
changes. Josh, I'm going to let you go. I know you're a very busy man, and I really appreciate you stopping by and talking with me about this. Josh, my last request is if folks listen or tune into this and they're interested in reaching out and engaging in a conversation with you, asking you a question, what's the best way for them to do so?
I'd say probably through LinkedIn. I do a lot on LinkedIn. So it's just linkedin.com/the Josh Stevens. They'll find me pretty quick. I have a website, stevensinsightgroup.com as well, that they can visit me there. But I'm really looking forward to Chicago and hope to see you there.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks again, Josh. Really was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And hope you have a good rest of your day. To subscribe to the Speaking of Data podcast, or to learn more about TDWI's research and training on all things data management and analytics, visit tdwi.org or click the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.